Montana Territory. 1883, the wind cut sharp through the cottonwoods as the town of Elmsworth whispered judgments behind shuttered windows. Zadie Whitlow stood on the cracked step of the county clerk's office, arms wrapped around her two children. Her dress was patched, her boots worn so thin she could feel the grit of gravel underfoot. Inside, voices carried. "She's unfit," said a woman with a pinched mouth and perfect gloves. "No husband, no money. That shack she lives in barely has a roof." Zadie swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. Jackson was 8, tall for his age and already too good at hiding worry. He held his little sister's hand tightly. June was 5, her curls wild and soft against Zadie's side. "I do not need a man to raise my children," Zadie said, stepping forward. "I need a fair chance." The county clerk, Mr. Halbridge, adjusted his spectacles and looked anywhere but at her. "The court's decision stands. The children will be placed with the Rumleys. You may write to them once a month." Zadie's breath caught. "That is not right. They do not even know them." Two men in town deputy coats stepped toward her. "Ma," Jackson whispered. "No," Zadie said, her voice breaking as she tightened her arms around them. "You will not take them from me, you will not." But they did. By dusk, her children were gone. She stood alone outside the office, the wind curling around her like it meant to pull her apart. She walked home in silence, back to the small cabin just outside of town where the roof leaked and the stove barely worked. There was nothing waiting for her but a bucket of cold water and an empty bed. 2 nights later, Zadie was on her knees in the field, digging out potatoes with her bare hands, pushing through the pain in her back. She had sold her last good coat for flour and soap. She worked with the kind of desperation that made her throat ache. That was when she heard the horses. She stood slowly, dirt on her hands, her dress soaked at the hem. 3 riders moved down the trail toward her. One of them, broader than the rest, wore a worn hat low over his eyes. His coat was dusted with prairie dirt. He stopped first. The other 2 trailed behind, talking low. "You Zadie Whitlow?" he asked, voice deep, steady. She nodded once, lifting her chin. "My name's Fletcher Rhoades," he said. "I heard what happened at the clerk's. Been on the trail 2 weeks, just got into town last night." She looked him over. Big man, maybe early 30s. His horse was lean and fast-looking. The way he sat it told her he had not always been a drifter. "I do not need pity," she said flatly. "Good," he said, "because I do not have any. I have a job, pays fair, could use help out at my spread." Zadie's eyes narrowed. "Why would you offer that to me?" "Because you work harder than most men I have seen," Fletcher said. "And because I do not like the way people talk about you in this place." She looked at him, unsure whether to feel insulted or grateful. "I watched them drag your boy and girl away like they were sacks of oats," Fletcher added, quieter now. "You did not cry. You just held on. That tells me more than any courthouse ever could." She looked away fast. The tears burned now. "I will take the job," she said, "but I do not owe you anything for that." "I did not ask you to," Fletcher replied. His ranch was 15 miles west, tucked into the foot of the hills. It was not grand, just a few fenced pastures, a half-built barn, and a house that needed new shutters. But it was clean, and it was quiet, and the land breathed easy. Zadie worked. She cooked, mended gear, helped brand calves, and patched roofs. Fletcher never watched her too long, never hovered too close. But he noticed things, like how she kept Jackson's old wooden carving in her apron pocket, or how she never sat down to eat until every chore was done. One evening, a storm rolled in fast. She was halfway to the barn when the sky cracked open. Fletcher was already there, fighting the latch on the gate. She ran to help. They got it bolted just as the rain came down. She stood, soaked through, hair plastered to her neck. "You always wait until the last minute?" she asked. Fletcher rubbed rain from his face. "I was hoping you would come help," she blinked. "You could have asked." He looked at her then, really looked. "You are not unfit, Zadie," he said. "You are just poor, and folks here treat that like a sin." She held his gaze. "It feels like one." He stepped closer. "But you are rich where it matters." She froze. "In grit," he said. "In heart, in how you never lie down even when the world kicks you." Her throat tightened. "I will get them back," she said. "My children. I will find a way." "You will not have to do it alone," Fletcher said. Zadie blinked hard. Rain poured around them, but she did not care. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his. He took her hand, and for the first time in weeks she let herself feel warmth, not from the fire, but from him. The first frost came early that year, crisping the tops of the grass and turning the mornings brittle. Zadie rose before the light, same as always, but now there was a coat waiting on the peg by the door. It was too big in the shoulders and smelled faintly of horses, but it was warm, and Fletcher had left it without a word. She wore it out to the pens, where the calves were starting to grow bolder, kicking up little clouds of dust as she moved among them. Fletcher was already there, hammering a rail back into place. "You sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Some," she said, watching the sun push above the hills. Dream Jackson was taller, voice deeper. "I guess I'm afraid I won't recognize them when I see them again." Fletcher set the hammer down. "You'll know him, same way they'll know you. That doesn't fade." She watched him for a long moment. "How do you know what fades?" He leaned on the fence, the light catching the edges of his face. "My mother had 5 boys. I was the oldest. When my father died, we split to 6 different counties. I didn't see my youngest brother again for 12 years. When I finally did, he walked right up and said, 'You still make that clicking sound when you think too hard.'" A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Do you?" "Only when I'm trying to remember how to talk to a woman who's been through more than I'll ever understand." Zadie looked down at her hands. "You're doing fine." They worked in quiet after that, and by afternoon the wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the yard. She was hanging laundry when she heard a wagon coming slow along the ridge road. It rattled with a tired gait, the horse thin-hipped and dull-eyed. A young man drove it barely out of boyhood with a woman beside him whose face was drawn tight from hunger. Fletcher stepped out of the barn and watched them come. The wagon stopped near the well. The boy climbed down, hat in hand. "We heard you might be hiring," he said. "Name's Illy. This here's my sister Calla. We come from over near Fort Shaw, lost our folks last winter." Fletcher nodded once. "You ride?" "I can. She's better with stock than I am, though." Zadie watched him hesitate before adding, "She's not simple, just don't speak much." Fletcher looked to Zadie. "You feel like teaching someone to mend harness. It's not hard," she said. "As long as she can listen close." Calla met her eyes and gave a small nod. "Then you can stay," Fletcher said. "You'll earn your food, that's all I ask." They put the pair up in the loft over the tack room. It wasn't much, but it was dry and held heat better than the bunkhouse. That night, Zadie sat on the back step, shelling beans into a tin basin while Fletcher fixed a lantern. The wind had dropped and the stars came out sharp and cold. "You ever want more than this?" she asked. He glanced up. "More than what, land?" "A roof. A quiet place to work." "You ever think about leaving it all?" He shook his head slowly. "I tried towns, tried drifting. Didn't suit me. Here I can build what I need, and if I'm lucky, maybe give others a place to land when they've got nowhere else." She turned a bean pod over in her fingers. "You ever think about having a family?" He didn't answer right away, just trimmed the lantern wick, careful and slow. "Used to," he said. "Then I figured I'd miss the window. Folks like me don't always get that second chance." She looked at him then, really looked. There was something in his expression, not hope exactly, but something quieter. Willingness, maybe, a kind of steadiness that asked nothing but offered everything. "I'm not looking to be rescued," she said. "I know," he replied. "I don't have much to offer. You've got more than you know." She set the basin aside and stood. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I'd like to learn how to ride better," she said. "Not just trail riding, real handling." "I'll teach you," Fletcher said. "Soon as the weather breaks." She nodded, then stepped inside without another word. That night she lay in bed listening to the wind press against the walls. She didn't cry. She didn't dream. But she slept deeply, and when morning came she woke with a strange lightness in her chest. Not hope. Not yet, but something like the memory of it. The wind had gone dry and restless by the time spring edged its way into the foothills. Snowmelt ran along the gullies, flattening old grass and turning the horses restless. Zadie stood barefoot in the creek behind the house, lifting stones one by one, her skirt hitched above her knees and her hair pinned back with a piece of twine. Her hands were red from the cold, but she didn't flinch as she worked. Fletcher stepped down the slope holding an old saddlebag, the leather worn pale at the corners. "You always this quiet when you're thinking hard?" he asked. Zadie glanced at him, then back to the water. "The current settles me. Makes things clearer." "What are you looking for?" "A flat one," she said, "about the size of a man's palm, smooth on both sides." "For what?" She held up a stone, studied it, then tossed it aside. "You'll see." He crouched beside her, boots in the mud. "You ever tell stories to your kids?" She nodded. "Every night. Jackson liked the ones where the poor boy outsmarted the rich man. June liked the ones with animals that talked. You remember the first one you told?" She picked up another stone and ran her thumb over it. "A coyote who lost his tail but tricked a crow into giving him a feathered one. Jackson laughed so hard he hiccuped for an hour." Fletcher smiled, slow and honest. "You still tell them, in your head, I mean." "I do. I think if I stop they'll fade." "You ever write them down?" "I tried." "Ink's expensive. Paper too." He handed her the saddlebag. "Open it." Inside sat a stack of folded parchment, a bottle of ink, and 2 nib pens wrapped in cloth. Zadie stared. "Where did you?" "Traded for them in Deer Lodge. Figured you'd make better use of 'em than I would." "I can't pay you back." "Not asking you to." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Then why?" "Because I want to know how they end." The stone in her hand stilled. She swallowed, then nodded once and rose from the water. 3 days later, Calla brought her the newspaper from town. It was wrinkled and stained but folded carefully. On the front page, near the bottom, was a list of names children relocated to new homes under the county's care. Jackson and June were listed under the Ramlai family, placed just outside Helena. Zadie stared at the ink until the names blurred. Then she stood, hands trembling at her sides. "They're not far," she said. Fletcher read the page over her shoulder. 2 days' ride. "Maybe less." "I have to go." He nodded. "We'll leave at first light." "I can't ask you. I already made up my mind." They left the next morning, the horses moving quick under a sky the color of bleached bone. Zadie rode a chestnut gelding Fletcher had trained himself. He watched her close as they climbed the ridge, how she kept her back straight even when the trail narrowed, how her hands never slipped the reins. They made camp near a low bend in the Missouri. Zadie tended the fire while Fletcher checked the horses. Later they sat beneath a pine, shoulders brushing, the stars blinking cold and close above them. "You never talked about what you want," she said, voice low. "I figure I'm building it." "And what does it look like when it's done?" He was quiet for a long moment. "A table with more chairs than I need. A roof that holds through winter. Someone to come home to, that's all." She looked down at her hands. "That's someone. You think it could be me?" He turned toward her. "I already know it is." She met his gaze, and this time she didn't look away. "I've been so afraid," she said. He reached for her hand, warm and firm. "You don't have to be. Not with me." Zadie leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. When the fire burned low, they didn't speak again. They just sat there, letting the silence hold what words couldn't. The next day, they reached the Rhoades farm just before dusk. The house was big, painted white, with a wide porch and a bell hung near the door. A girl about June's age skipped rope in the yard, her hair tied with ribbon. Zadie stayed at the edge of the fence. Fletcher stood beside her, quiet and still. A boy stepped out from the barn, tall and lean, with a look that stopped Zadie's breath. Jackson, he saw her, froze, then dropped the pail he was carrying. "Mama," her knees gave a little, but she stayed standing. "Jackson, baby," she whispered. He ran. She met him halfway, arms around him before his boots even touched the road. June came next, barefoot and crying, her arms flung around both of them. Behind them, Mrs. Rhoades stepped outside, mouth tight. Fletcher walked up slow. "Ma'am," he said, polite but unwavering, "you've got two children who were taken from their mother by a court that never asked the right questions. We're here to fix that." Mrs. Rhoades looked to Zadie, then to the children clinging to her skirts. She didn't argue. She just nodded once and went back inside. That night, Zadie and Fletcher rode east with two children tucked between them. June sang softly against her brother's shoulder. Jackson held the reins steady while Fletcher guided them home. When the house came into view, its windows glowing warm against the dark, Zadie felt something settle deep in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. She turned to Fletcher. "This is the life you meant, isn't it?" He nodded, his hand brushing hers. "Built from the ground up. Nothing borrowed, nothing owed." Zadie smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Then let's build it together." The first spring rain came slow but steady, soaking the ground until the creek banks swelled and the fence posts leaned with the weight of it. Inside the house, the air smelled of wet wood and rising bread. June sat on a stool near the hearth, humming as she stitched the hem of a worn curtain. Jackson was outside with Calla, helping her train the new colt to take a halter. Zadie stood at the table, rolling dough with practiced hands. The sleeves of her blouse were damp from washing, and a strand of hair had come loose, curling against her cheek. Fletcher leaned in the doorway, his presence quiet but grounded, the way a tree holds its place through wind. He watched her for a while until she looked up. "You don't rest much," he said. "There's too much to be done. You've been baking since dawn." She brushed flour from her fingers. "It's for the neighbors. The Wendell's boy's been sick. I thought a loaf might help." Fletcher stepped inside, setting a wrapped parcel on the table. "Then you'll want this." Zadie unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a small jar of honey, thick and golden. "Where did you get this?" Traded with a man passing through from the Bitterroots. Had a wagon full of beeswax and stories. Said honey's good for a cough, good for a heart too. Zadie looked at him, quiet. "I never asked how you learned to trade so fair," she said. "My uncle ran a post near the border, taught me to listen more than I speak. Said you find what someone needs before you find what they want." She turned the jar in her hands. "And what do I need?" Fletcher met her eyes. "A place where you're never looked at like you're less." Zadie didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, after the chores were done and the children had gone to bed, she stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the smell of wild mint and wet pine. Fletcher sat on the edge of the steps, whittling a piece of juniper. She sat beside him, close enough that their knees brushed. "Jackson told me you used to build boats," she said, "flatboats, for cattle crossing. Nothing fancy. He said you carved your name into each one. I figured if they sank, I want someone to know who made the mess." She smiled, then looked out into the dark. "June asked if we're staying here for good." Fletcher set the knife down. "What did you tell her?" I said we'd stay as long as we're welcome. He was quiet for a moment. This place, every board, every nail, I built it hoping someone like you might walk through the door one day. You're not just welcome, Zadie. You belong. She turned her face toward him, expression unreadable. I've spent years waiting to feel like I had the right to want more, she said. You don't have to wait now. He reached for her hand, fingers calloused and sure. She let him take it. I didn't think there was a man left who saw what I was worth when there wasn't anything to offer but myself. He looked at her then, full and unflinching. You're rich where it matters, he said. You always were. She leaned in and he kissed her. No rush. No promise beyond what they already knew. When they pulled apart, the porch creaked beneath them, the world still and waiting. I'd like to build a room off the back, Fletcher said. For the children. Give them light in the mornings. Zadie nodded. I'd like that. And maybe one day, he continued, voice low, we could build another for us, with a door that locks and windows that open to the east. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, I think we should. In that moment, nothing needed fixing, nothing needed proving. The wind quieted, the land listened, and the road behind them softened under the weight of something finally made right. By midsummer, the house had grown by 2 rooms and a porch swing. The lumber came from a sawyer east of Phillipsburg, hauled in slow by wagon and nailed into place by Fletcher, and Ali with careful hands and more sweat than words. Zadie kept the ledger, noting each cost in tidy lines, and June counted nails in a tin pail while Jackson took to chopping kindling like the axe belonged to him. The children filled the place without trying, Jackson leaving his whittling scraps near the hearth, June humming to herself as she braided scraps of cloth into rugs. Calla had painted a set of wooden spoons with wildflowers, and Zadie arranged them on the kitchen wall, careful not to crowd them too close. One evening, long after the fire had settled into embers, Fletcher stood near the doorway watching the last light fade over the hills. Zadie joined him, a shawl over her shoulders. You're quiet. He shifted his weight, thumb hooked in his belt. Got a letter from my brother, her brow lifted. The one in Cascade. Other one, Ezra, he's ranching near Glendive now, said he heard I'd put down roots. Asked if it was true. She tilted her head. What did you write back? Nothing yet. Figured I'd ask if you minded him visiting. Zadie leaned against the doorframe beside him. I don't mind, if he brings good manners and doesn't try to fix what isn't broken. Fletcher chuckled low. You sound like Mama. I'd take that as a compliment. He glanced at her sidelong. She'd have liked you. Zadie reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I would have liked her. They stood like that until June called from the loft, asking for a story. Fletcher watched Zadie climb the stairs, her voice rising gently as she spun a tale about a fox with a painted tail who outwitted a mountain lion. He stayed there long after the story ended, the house quiet but still breathing with the shape of love. Later that week, Fletcher took Jackson out along the ridge to show him how to set a snare line. They came back dusty and tired, Jackson's face set with quiet pride. He's got your steadiness, Zadie said, handing Fletcher a cup of water as they walked the horses to the trough. He's got your eyes, Fletcher replied, sees more than he says. Zadie looked toward the barn where June was feeding a half-grown hen bits of cornbread from her palm. She's been sleeping through the night. She knows she's safe now. Zadie nodded, lips pressed together. I was worried she wouldn't find peace again. She did, because you gave it to her. The words settled between them, soft but anchoring. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the house deepened. Fletcher and Zadie slept in the room they'd built together, the walls still smelling faintly of pine and linseed oil. He'd carved her name into the windowsill, small and neat, where the sun touched it each morning. One Sunday, As the light warmed the hills and the air held the first trace of fall, Fletcher saddled the horses without saying why. He packed bread, cheese, and a jar of plum preserves, then helped Zadie into the saddle as the children waved them off. They rode west, past the cottonwoods and into a grassy hollow ringed with stone. Fletcher dismounted first, holding her reins as she stepped down. "What's this place?" she asked. He walked to the edge of the clearing where a small wooden frame stood. It was going to be the start of a bunkhouse. "Then I thought it might be something else." Zadie stepped closer, eyes tracing the lines of the frame. "You planning to finish it? Only if you say yes." He turned toward her, reaching into his coat pocket. The ring wasn't fancy, just silver, shaped by hand, with a small garnet set flush in the band. "I want to marry you, Zadie. Not because you need someone, not because I want to fix anything, but because I've never met a woman with more courage or more grace. I want to give you a good name to wear if you'll have it." She didn't speak at first, just looked down at the ring, then back at him. "I never thought I'd have a choice in that again," she said. "You do. You always did." She took the ring, slid it on her finger, and smiled so wide it softened every line in her face. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed at the end of the month, under a cottonwood strung with cloth ribbons the children had dyed with berries. Calla played the fiddle slow and sweet, and Ellie brought out a bottle of blackberry wine he'd saved for the occasion. The vows were simple. No preacher, no papers, just hands clasped, eyes steady, and words spoken with the kind of quiet truth that didn't need a crowd to echo. Afterward, Zadie and Fletcher danced in the yard beneath a sky thick with stars, her feet bare, his steps careful and sure. Life didn't change all at once. The work stayed hard. The days still rose before the sun. But now there was laughter in the mornings and music on Sundays, and the kind of peace that came not from stillness, but from shelter shared. Years passed. The house weathered storms and seasons, but it never stood empty again. Jackson grew into his shoulders, took to training horses with a patience that mirrored Fletcher's. June learned to read, then to write, and began setting her mother's stories down in ink with a sure hand. Zadie kept the ledger still, but her days were fuller now with sunlight through clean windows, with the smell of fresh bread, with Fletcher's steady presence at her side. And on the windowsill of their room, where the sun rose each morning, the name he carved stayed sharp and clear: Zadie Rhoades. A name she wore like it had always been hers. A name forged not from rescue, but from love, quiet, steady, and wholly earned.